Hello and welcome to Templar Night TV. Now I think this is a really interesting topic, and it's something that I've been talking about to other historians, but also piqued my interest on a recent visit to Rome. So what I'm going to talk about is, did the Pope, or the popes, over the centuries actually own the Ark of the Covenant and other treasures from the temple in Jerusalem? And strange to say, but there is some evidence that they did. So listen up and then tell me what you think when I've explained everything. So on a recent visit to Rome, I went to the Lateran Palace. This is the papal palace attached to the Basilica of Saint John Lateran. Now, Saint John Lateran, up until the 1300s, was the residence of the popes. It's where the popes lived. They didn't live in the Vatican. They lived in Saint John Lateran within the city walls of Rome, because it was basically safer apart from anything else. And if you go there, if you go to the Basilica of Saint John Lateran, you'll see that they have there, in a small chapel to the side, something called the Scala Santa. They have the marble steps from the palace of Pontius Pilate, where it's said that up those steps Jesus walked to then be put on trial by Pontius Pilate. And pilgrims still go up on their knees up the Scala Santa. Now, at the top of the Scala Santa, which pilgrims are not allowed to enter, is a small medieval chapel called the Sancta Sanctorum. The Sancta Sanctorum means Holy of Holies. Now, what was the original Holy of Holies? The original Holy of Holies was a room in the temple in Jerusalem, the temple built by King Solomon. And inside the Holy of Holies was the Ark of the Covenant, that gold casket that nobody except the high priest was allowed to approach or go anywhere near on pain of death. And it was believed that, as it were, God dwelt on the Ark of the Covenant. Within it were the Ten Commandments, the rod of Aaron, the rod of Moses, and some manna from heaven that had dropped from heaven. So that was what was originally in the Temple of Solomon. But as we know, in the 500s BC, the Babylonians sacked the city of Jerusalem and they destroyed the Temple of Solomon. And after that, the Ark of the Covenant disappears. There's some stories that it was hidden, but it disappears, basically. It's never seen again. And other temple treasures, of course, disappear at the same time. Now, the temple was, of course, rebuilt by King Herod, that King Herod, of course, famous in the New Testament, and then that temple was then destroyed by the Romans. In Rome, there is a triumphal arch that celebrates the destruction of the second temple by the Romans, the Arch of Titus. It's still there in the Roman Forum, you can see it, and it shows on it the menorah, the golden menorah that was once in the Temple of Jerusalem, being taken by Roman soldiers as booty, basically, as loot, being pillaged and being brought back to Rome. It's even said that the Colosseum was paid for by the treasure from the temple in Jerusalem. But the Ark of the Covenant, was that brought back by the Romans? Most people think no, it was still missing. Others believe it may have been, but where did it end up? Well, we then have to fast forward to the Middle Ages, and the popes, as I said, were living in the Lateran Palace until the 1300s, when they went into a near 100-year exile to Avignon, which is in modern France, and this was the period during which the Templars were crushed. Then the popes decided to come back to Rome when the political situation had improved. And there was a kind of a competition between the Basilica of Saint John Lateran and St. Peter's Basilica, what we now call the Vatican, over where the Pope was going to live. And priests at both those places of worship, as it were, sold the case for the Pope remaining in their respective place of worship. And what the priests at St. John Lateran said was, well, look, we have all the treasures of the Temple of Jerusalem here in the Basilica. We have the Ark of the Covenant, we have the Menorah, we have all these incredible treasures. And it was remarked in an inventory that was kept by the priests at Saint John Lateran, and also a document written by an Icelandic pilgrim who was visiting Saint John Lateran. Both those documents talk about the Ark being in Saint John Lateran, and that it was sometimes taken out of the altar in the Basilica and taken to the Holy of Holies, where the Pope would, as it were, consecrate the Eucharist above the Ark at Easter time. But there is no doubt that from different sources we are told that the Ark of the Covenant and the Menorah and other temple treasures were at the Basilica of St John Lateran, and that we also have a chapel there where only the Pope was allowed to enter, called the Holy of Holies, similar to the way in which the high priest was only allowed to enter the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem. And there was this kind of idea that the Basilica of St John Lateran was the new temple, that the old temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed, but now St John's Basilica, St John Lateran Basilica, was the new temple, a temple dedicated to Christ, but that it had the treasures of the old temple. So the old and the new were coming together at the Lateran. And then the Ark of the Covenant disappears in the 18th century. We have a Pope, Pope Benedict, who turns up on a visit to St John Lateran. Remember, he's now living at the Vatican, because the Vatican won that battle to decide where the Pope was going to live when they came back from Avignon. And the Pope is paying a visit to the Lateran, and we're told that he was almost kind of embarrassed that the Ark of the Covenant and the Menorah and other treasures like the table from the Last Supper were still on display there. I suppose this was the age of the Enlightenment, the age of rationalism, and the Pope decided that these relics should be removed from public view. At least we're told that's why he did that. But where did they go? It seems inconceivable that the Pope would have destroyed the Ark of the Covenant. So is it taken then into the Vatican archives? Now, some people in Israel today believe that the Vatican does have the Menorah. There was even an attempt to do a citizen's arrest on Pope John Paul II when he visited Israel a couple of decades ago. And the Israeli authorities asked to be able to search, essentially, the Vatican archive to see whether the Menorah, a symbol sacred to the Jewish people, was down in the Vatican archives. So there are people who believe the Menorah is down there, but there's also other people who think that the Ark of the Covenant must also have been moved from St John the Lateran down into the Vatican archives. Who knows? I don't know. But it is an intriguing story, and as I say, it's backed up by contemporary sources and later sources that St John the Lateran and that the Pope did indeed have the Ark of the Covenant and the Menorah and other temple treasures, which more than likely the Romans had brought back after sacking the Second Temple. I'd like to know your opinion. What do you think? And also, if you like to get more Templar-related history and mystery, do feel free to buy my book, The Knights Templar History and Mystery, available at all recommended, upstanding and decent online bookstores. So get your copy. In the meantime, as I say, tell me what you think, and as Templars used to say, non nobis domine.